And now we will go ahead and introduce Duane Wessels, Verisign, to talk about ongoing issues and anomalies in existent and non-existent top-level query names. Thanks, Duane.
All right. So I want to talk today. Which button do I push? Green? There we go. So this talk is about queries to root name servers, one of my favorite topics. Mostly queries for TLDs or strings that don't exist. The data that I have comes from a couple of different sources, ARoot and JRoot, operated by Verisign, and then some data also from DITL. What you'll see is going to be a little bit similar to ICANN's DNS magnitude data, but here there's a difference that I'm ranking based on query volume, not the magnitude formula. So I have a lot of graphs to show. Each graph will show query rate and ranking in terms of popularity. So this is what the graphs look like. The lines come from Verisign data, ARoot and JRoot. The top graph is query rate. The bottom graph is the ranking. And then the big circles, the data points, come from DITL data from 2014 to 2024. This is one of the reasons that I was yesterday talking about it would be nice to have some access to the historical data to look back even a little farther in time and see what this data looked like back then. So first, TLDs that exist. .com, as you may not be surprised, generally is the most popular. It ranks #1 in the query data. If you look closely, you'll see sometimes some data points where it's not #1, it drops down to #2, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But generally, this is what you'd expect, and the traffic sort of increases reasonably over time. .arpa is currently, if you look over at the right of the rank graph, it's currently in the #2 to #3 range, but historically it's been a lot lower. There's been a significant change in ARPA over the last few years, and there's a couple of spikes here. There was a spike in 2023 from a large cloud services provider. There was another one more recently that has not dropped back down. So this brings ARPA up pretty high in terms of the rankings. For the root zone itself, also sort of relatively high in terms of rankings. It's around #5 or so, #6 maybe. In 2022, there was sort of this interesting thing where a large US ISP started sending a lot of priming queries to the root zone on a daily basis. Interestingly, over IPv6, but then that dropped off, after a while. So this table shows the top 20 most queried TLD strings from the ARoot and JRoot. I think this is actually just from ARoot. But 12 of the top 20 are undelegated strings. These are strings that don't exist. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. So special use TLDs. .local is a very popular special use TLD that we see in root server data. You can see it's grown sort of steadily over time. RFC 6762 describes .local for its use in multicast DNS and says that caching DNS resolvers should recognize these as special and not query for them in the DNS. Similarly, .test is another special use domain, and one very interesting thing about this is we'll see some more like this, but this is the first one where if you look at the top graph, there's a divergence between what we see at ARoot and JRoot. At ARoot, we see a lot more queries for .test than we do at JRoot. And also, we see most of those queries look like they are QNAME minimized. So we can't really tell more than that what might be behind these. So that is an interesting case where we've gained privacy, but we've lost some sort of intelligence about what might be going on with .test and some of these others. Also, so .test, there's an RFC that talks about .test and says, again, caching DNS servers should not look these up, so on. .localhost, also in this category, and again, has this pattern where in the last few years there's been this divergence between A and J. And it turns out that it's not just ARoot. Looking at the DITL data, you can see that it looks like ARoot, BRoot, CRoot get a lot more queries for some of these strings than all the others. So whatever's generating these queries might be picking the first three and then not picking the others for some reason. I don't know. .invalid, a similar pattern, right? In recent years, there's this difference, but yeah. So I included .internal here. There's been a lot of interest in .internal recently because it was sort of designated as a private use TLD. It's not officially in the category of special use TLD, but it might be. And there's an interesting event or thing going on with .internal. Over sort of a long period of time, it ramped up, and we're seeing all these queries coming from another large cloud services provider. We got this to go down by doing some outreach from Verisign, and so right at sort of the end of 2023, start of 2024, it did go back down. So a number of the strings that appear in this data are networking related. .bb router is one, which, as far as I can tell, my best guess is this refers to broadband router, not a particular brand, but maybe some generic software that's run on a number of different products. And one very interesting thing about this string is that for JRoot anyway, there's more queries than ARoot. So this is flipped a little bit from some of the others. J tends to be higher than A, but again, this increasing sort of steadily over time. .unify is associated with Ubiquity products, again, increasing over time, especially recently. Zyxel has a product called Unified Security Gateway, and we see lots of queries for that in the root data. Belkin is one that's interesting because this is something that's been seen for a long time, and it looks to me like it's getting better, right? This is one that's going down over time and decreasing, which is nice to see. Hopefully that's because they've made changes in their product and eliminated using that string. On the other hand, here's .dhcp, not a particular product brand, but a generic term where we see lots of queries for strings that end with .dhcp over time. D-Link, another well-known hardware vendor, and again, this one looks to me like it has gotten better over time. It's gone down recently and sort of leveled off. Wi-Fi, on the other hand, a generic term, increasing over time. This looks, this is similar to the pattern for .dhcp, and also another one where it looks like more popular at JRoot than at ARoot. So a number of cloud-related TLD strings also sort of filter up to the top. Nova is a component of the OpenStack project, which I forget exactly what its purpose is, to be honest. But so this has this pattern where there's been this shift and increase in traffic in recent years. The documentation for the Nova project says that there's this parameter .dhcp_domain, and what you should put here is any string that is a valid domain name, whereas the default is clearly not a valid domain name, right? Another OpenStack component is Neutron, and it has documentation also which says, edit this config file and assign a value different to OpenStack local. Of course, it seems like maybe not very many people are doing that. Another cloud-related product is Consul, which is something from HashiCorp, and this documentation says that by default, the Consul responds to DNS queries in the .consul domain. And there were two sort of interesting events recently where in 2019, 2020, we saw this really big increase, and some folks from Verisign reached out and got that sort of squashed. And then more recently, it kind of came back. I think this was actually a different source, but again, we contacted some folks and got that one also back down. .scloud is something that Roy Ahrens pointed out to me recently, and I believe that both ICANN and Verisign reached out sort of at the same time to those folks and got this one squashed pretty quickly. Just end with a couple of sort of really crazy ones. If you've seen this kind of data before, you've probably seen this. Get cache DHCP results for current config is a string that's been in root query data for quite a while, and Roy started a thread about this in 2018. Warren noted that it comes from some Android code base, and he said it's already factored out. And that was 2018, but here we still see it some 6 years later. And then this other one is also very interesting to me, .com SDK/EXP. My theory on this is that this is a sort of a programming bug where they're trying to terminate a string and they're doing it in the wrong place. You'll note that /SDK-EXP happens to be the exact same length as HTTPS://. So I think they're just terminating the string in the wrong place, and that's why that's there. So this has been going on for a long time, at least 20 years, maybe even longer. I had a hard time finding some papers that referenced it earlier than that. But why does this keep happening? It seems to me that products that need to have a default domain should not use non-existent, non-standard TLDs. Should maybe use the namespace under their own control instead, or configure their software to not emit queries, under the default configuration. Force the users to change it to something else. And I think that it might be useful to have an RFC that sort of talks about this, and that's kind of what I wanted to get some feedback from you today, as if you also think that would be a useful thing. So that's the time I've been given. The clock says 3+ minutes for Q&A.
Tommy Jensen, Microsoft. +1 for encoding something in RFC, even if it's just an informational talk about what we're seeing, and please don't. I noticed a lot of those have a spike that may or may not have retreated in 2023 specifically. Do you have any idea why?
I don't. I mean, we'd probably have to sit down and you'd have to point to me exactly what you're,
Sure.
which one, but I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't ring any bells.
Hi, Lars-Johan Liban, NetNode, also +1 for coding this in an RFC. Reach out if you need help.
Okay, thanks. All right, thanks.